Welcome to the January iteration of the Grand Rapids Drupal user group. We are today going to be talking about Google Optimize and how it can be used on Drupal websites, but more generally any website. And to present what this is and lead our discussion a little bit, we are going to have Haley today. So take it away, Haley.
All righty. So yeah, I'm going to be doing kind of just like a high level overview of Google Optimize, just kind of going over what it is, how to get started using it, and I'll walk through creating a really simple A/B test and talk a little bit about different possibilities and ways that this can be used. So enjoy my very bare bones presentation. So what is Google Optimize? It's a tool that integrates with Google Analytics and Google Tag Manager to let you perform experiments on your web pages. So the experiments can test like the performance of different variations of content or design to see what choices to give you more informed data on what design and content is most likely to perform better. So there are a couple different types of experiments that you can do with Google Optimize. The first type is called a test, and a test is just basically comparing two or more variations of a page or a page section to see which of the variations is most likely to be the best in terms of what goals you have set. So there's a couple different types of tests. One is an A/B test, and that's just simple, comparing one version of a page to another. There's something called a multivariate test, which is where you can set up a bunch of different variations of like page sections, and then Google will automatically generate multiple different pages with different combinations of your sections. So it gives you a lot more variety in the number of variants you can test against one another. And then a redirect test is the last one, and that's sort of exactly like an A/B test, except you're comparing two completely different pages against one another. So rather than having one page and maybe just updating like a section in a different variant, you would have two completely different pages to compare. The next type of experiment is called a personalization. Oh, and I forgot to mention, tests can run for 90 days. That's the maximum time that a test can run. It can be shorter, but 90 days is the maximum. A personalization is something that can last forever. So that's just basically changing the content of a page to be more personalized to individual site users. So anything from just like putting their name on the page to changing content based on where they are in the world or their browsing history, things like that. Just kind of personalizing a web page to a specific user.
What information do you have to work with when you're doing the personalization? Do you provide that information, or does that come from Google?
I think it comes from Google. So it would be, I'm guessing based on their, like, for example, their geographic location, it'd probably just be based on where, like maybe their IP address or something like that. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure on that answer. The last type of test is a relatively new one that they added in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and it's a banner template. So it just kind of lets you inject a little banner at the top of your website to give more like time-sensitive announcements or information, like maybe you had a sudden change in business hours that you want to communicate to people, or you're having shipping delays. It lets you easily just add a quick banner to the top of your page. Oh, oops, apparently I had this. So experiment objectives. These are, experiment objectives are essentially like functions of your website that you want to test and optimize. So for example, a couple common ones are like number of page views or session duration, or for like a e-commerce website, it could be revenue or conversions. What objective you pick for your experiment determines how Google Optimize will run your test and figure out which variation is performing better. So it'll use that objective to be able to say this one seems to convert more than the original, or whatever your goal is. There are a couple of different types of objectives. The first one is just a really basic one called the system objective. And that's what I mentioned first, is like page views, session duration, and I think bounces is another one. There's also analytics goals. So if you have an analytics account that's linked to your Google Optimize account, you get a couple of additional options like revenue or transactions. If you have like different, I think AdSense is another Google product. If you have that linked, you can get your ads, how many ads have been clicked, things like that. And then there's also, you can also do custom objectives, which are a little bit more involved, but they have a way that you can create your own. Requirements for using Google Optimize are pretty minimal. So all you really need is a Google account that has access to both analytics and optimize. Otherwise, you can't really link the two. Google Analytics installed on the website. You need a Google Optimize container, Chrome web browser. Sorry, Google thinks I'm talking to her. Try the following. Start new. Hey, Google, stop. Sometimes she's not super smart. And then the Optimize Chrome extension is optional, but it's really helpful for creating different variations just in your web browser. And I'll show how that looks in a second. It's actually really easy to use. Installing Google Optimize is also really easy. There's two different ways you can do it. The recommended way is putting a script that looks like this in the head of your web page or pages. And then the other way is if you either don't have access to that or it's just too much of a pain to do that, you can just use Google Tag Manager to create a Google Optimized tag.
So is the specific tag preferred over Tag Manager?
It is recommended by Google, putting the script in the head. It's for performance reasons. It didn't really say what else. But yeah, that's their recommended way, apparently. Okay, so I'm going to walk through how to create a simple experiment. I think I have to change what window I'm looking at. Okay. So this is what Google Optimize looks like. As you can see, I've already run an experiment in the past that's ended. Yeah, so if we want to create a new experience, it's pretty easy. Just click the create experience button and then just give it a name. Yeah, my experience is fine. And then you can pick the page that you want this experiment to run on. I think you can also add additional URLs as well, but we'll start with this one. And then these are what I was going over earlier, the different types of experiences. I'll just do an A/B test for now. It's the simplest. So this is the edit page of your experience, and adding different variations of the page is pretty easy. Just click add variant. I'll just keep it named that for simplicity. And you can choose how many visitors you want to view different variations. It just defaults to splitting it evenly, but you can change that if you want. And then with the Optimize Chrome extension, you're able to edit the variant directly in the browser. So, of course, I'm logged in, so this looks really weird. But let's say for my experiment, I want to change the button text to maybe something that's a little more like action oriented. So I can click on this button. And over here in this little panel, you can see kind of everything about that button. You can change the design of it. You can change the placement of the button. You can change the font. There's a bunch of different options. And then I can also edit the text of this button. So that's what I'll do now for this experiment. I'll say, learn more about our team. So you can make your changes directly in the browser. And then you can continue to make as many changes as you want on your page. And when you're done, it'll give you a little summary up here, and then you can save it. I think this is just because I'm logged in. So then you can continue to make as many as you would like. Just following that same process. You can also change the ways that your experiment gets run and who it gets presented to. Those are a little bit more in depth than what I plan to go over today, but you can change demographics of your audience and things like that. Each experiment needs to have at least one objective, otherwise it has nothing to test. So you can either create your custom one here or choose from a list, and these are just the very basic ones. And if you had like e-commerce enabled or AdSense, you would get those additional analytics goals here, but for now I just have these simple ones. So I'll just choose session duration. And at the end of this, I'll post a link to an article that has a bunch of resources that will go over. It'll have links to all of the different types of objectives and what they mean, and a couple of other resources as well. A lot of this stuff is just set when you create your optimized tag. If you loaded it via Tag Manager, which I did, so I don't really have to do any of those. You can choose to be notified about any results that get posted or people who participate in your experiment. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple to set up an experiment. You can either start it immediately once you're done creating it, or you can schedule it to start in the future. Once you hit start, it immediately starts running. And the next thing you need to do is just wait. It recommends at least 2 weeks before you'll get any type of meaningful results. And it may even take 1 to 2 days to even see any results show up in your experiment. But the results are actually really easy. Google makes it really easy to see what variant is the best. Once your experiment ends, or once enough time has passed, you'll have this message at the very top of the results page that will clearly tell you, like for this one, for example, the original design was better than the variant that I created by a significant amount. So, and you can kind of see that down here. They have this thing called probability to be best. And that's just based on the number of experiment sessions or users that participated, based on the objective that I set. It just kind of shows which of the variations performed better. And there's a couple of different scenarios that you could see up here based on the results. If you haven't waited enough time, you might see a message like waiting for data or no experiment sessions. No experiment sessions is either just nobody has completed the experiment yet, or you might have a problem with your experiment or with your Google Optimize installation. And so there's some diagnostics that they'll recommend that you run. There could be a message that says there is no leader, and that means that they've had enough data come in that they can reliably say that either one of your variants is good. So not super helpful, but at least you know that whichever one you pick, it's the same probability to convert. This one is the original is the leader, and then there's another where it says a specific variant is the leader, and it'll tell you which one. Or there might, if you have more than 2, it is possible that more than one variant is the leader. And it'll tell you, you can always look at this down here to see which one is better, but yeah, there's, I think that's all of the different possible results that you can get. And so once you've had enough time and you get this message, you can reliably make a decision on your design based on the data that you get from this. And if you need to like explain your decisions to like stakeholders or anything like that, you can present this as kind of proof that your decisions are going to be successful.
So I'm interested in learning a little bit more about how the change is actually applied to the page. So since especially if we're talking in the context of Drupal, if you got a page that is dynamic, that might have different pieces of content depending on who the user is or whatever, does this expose, when you use that editor to make a change, does it tell you how it's targeting the thing? Is it based on a class or something like that?
I think it's based on, let me go back. I remember seeing.
You got that little warning about dynamic content. So clearly it is, if you have that turned on, it must be doing some monitoring for changes on the page and then reapplying, but it's got to use some rule to decide that.
I think.
So how does it know it's that element? Oh, is maybe it's telling you, like, how does it know it's that link?
I'm not sure. My guess is that it adds some sort of unique ID or something so that it knows.
Right, but it's going to need to, since it only runs after the page is loaded, since it's JavaScript, it's going to need to base that information on what was there. Is there,
I'm not entirely sure.
You said that the Chrome extension wasn't required. What does it look like if you don't use that? Is there a different way you make changes? Or do you need to use the extension in order to be able to make those kinds of edits?
Let's try it. Yeah, that's interesting because the Google like the resource hub for Google Optimize said that it was optional, but now that you say that, I'm not sure.
Maybe they have a web-only interface for it, I suppose.
I don't know if I'm going to need to restart my browser since I just turned it off. Maybe it's not optional.
Maybe it's optional for Optimize in general, but not for that feature.
Yeah.
Because you could do the redirect test.
Yeah, I imagine you could do that still, because you just have two completely different pages. Yeah, I think it must be required for certain tests then. Because this doesn't give any option otherwise.
When it says changes one, is there some kind of summary of the changes besides the edit?
There's just this very basic one.
Okay.
I think you have to actually like go into the editor to see specifically what the changes are.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it does a good job figuring it out, but it would be nice to know in the case of a very dynamic page, whether it's reliable.
All right, my final words here will be on just a few suggestions on ways to use this. So you could do anything from entire pages to just simple page sections. So your high traffic pages or pages that you really need some sort of objective to be met are really good candidates for these types of tests. So home pages, marketing landing pages, for e-commerce sites, if you have product category pages and then detail pages, search pages, cart or contact forms are also good options. And on any of these pages, you could change, test anything from just the style of the copy used on the page. So maybe you could test different tone of the way things are written, test different paragraph lengths, the words that you use, even just the way text is styled and presented. Navigation links are also a good option. So how many links, if you have too many or too few, where the links are placed, if you have sub-navigation or not. Buttons are also something good for testing because they're really easy to change. So the type of text used, so in mine, I was testing action, like text that used more like verbs versus just non-action oriented text, I guess. Button color, size, placement, even just simple things like if I add a drop shadow, does it make it more appealing or things like that. Images and videos, you could test different subject matter of images and see if like maybe images with people in them, do they perform better? Size and placement of images or layout with text. Forms, testing the number of form fields or even field labels would be a good option. Fields being required versus optional. And finally, my final example was site-wide search, the placement of the search box, advanced search versus simple search, having an autocomplete or not. Things like that would all be examples of elements that you could fairly easily test. And that's all that I have.
Fantastic.
So I have a question. What, if any, cases could you or have you experienced where you would want to change the weight on the original and the variants? Like, why wouldn't you want that to be 50-50? It seems like it would skew the results if you weighted one of them more than the other.
I think in terms of skewing the results, that's partly what they would factor into the calculation. I think that probably the answer that to answer that question, you need a statistician, but but it might be that your change is, I'm just trying to think of how I'd answer that. Let's say you have a high traffic site. You don't need a huge number of impressions in order to get good statistics in that case. And maybe you're making what you consider to be a pretty risky change. And so, you know, if you're getting 5,000 impression or people coming to your site a day, maybe you really only need 1,000 of those people, and then that'll be enough data, and you can be a little safer by, I don't know, I'm making that up, but that's what I would think.
That sounds pretty correct. There's not really any explanation in the resource hub about it. It just kind of tells you how to do it, but it doesn't say why you would. Okay. But that sounds good.
I mean, that makes sense. If you've got, if you're looking at a risky change or something, then that makes sense that you would maybe want to make that like 20% or something instead, just so it's not shown to as many people. Like if you're wanting to put a video on your homepage or something.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
but
makes sense.
probably the ideal number would be high enough to make it statistically significant, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that would have to be based off of the analytics that you've already looked at for your site.
Sure.
Mhm.
Okay.
I think one good example would be, let's say, Google, the search bar page. If they wanted to test to see if they had more betterness if they had dark mode versus light mode being displayed. They likely wouldn't want to push out dark mode to half their population. So
yeah, if you think about like, yeah, major platforms that do rollouts, it always seems to be that you hear this thing is coming, but nobody you know has ever seen it. They probably have that percentage very low in those kinds of situations, so they don't need it to be very high.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I would probably use Google if they used dark mode.
I'm surprised they don't.
They don't offer that? That's interesting.
I think they do, like on mobile. My
Yeah,
search
probably on
is
mobile.
dark mode, but not on just desktop, which is weird.
And that might be a phone setting and not a Google setting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have my desktop set to dark mode also,
Oh,
but I also have a Google phone, so maybe it knows my phone settings better than my Mac settings.
Probably some conspiracy to get you to buy a Chromebook.
Yeah.
Well, that seems like a very useful and cool tool. Thank you very much, Haley, for that tour.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And as always, if you have thoughts later or questions, you can leave those either in the YouTube comments or in the comment section on our Meetup page for the event. Those are also good places to leave any ideas for topics you'd like to either present on or be informed about by someone else in the future. So thank you again, and we will see you next month.
Awesome. Thanks.